This short story is part of the Futures Calling series sponsored by Plextor. Visit facebook.com/Plextor Global to learn more about our SSD products or to listen to other stories in the series. Coffee Geek, written by Frank Ward. He admitted it was one of his obsessions: good coffee. Jack McLean, computer support tech and coffee geek, spent more of his pitiful income on fine coffee beans than he could afford, and this Sunday brunch he was coaxing a perfect espresso out of a chrome machine that had cost him a month's salary. His housemates buzzed around the kitchen while chatting about girlfriends, boyfriends, last night's clubs and bars, part of a world that Jack rarely visited. Before he had so much as a sip, his phone rang, and his boss's unsmiling face appeared on the display. "Not busy, I see. Come to the office and give me a hand," he ordered. Jack's boss was one of those people that you tended not to say no to, even on the weekend. The boss was an avid bodybuilder with plenty of dubious friends. Mentally, Jack had named him Psycho. Marcus was the kind of boss to whom it was always a lot simpler to agree. Sitting on the bus, Jack wondered if he could get away with loading a fake background and GPS coordinates next time he was rung during the weekend, but he decided it wasn't worth the risk. Overhead, he could hear the whine of an unmanned military drone. They were meant to provide security, but despite government assurances, they now made everyone nervous. Last year, some teens had hacked into controls of a couple of them and fired the missiles into the city for fun. The company imported pharmaceuticals, mostly selling them wholesale to small drug companies and to clinics. Although successful, it operated from a small brick warehouse. The staff consisted of a team of not overly nice salesmen. Elizabeth, the cute receptionist who had probably quit like all the others once she'd had enough of the sexist comments, Jack for IT support, and Marcus, the boss whose primary contribution was his shouting. Over the couple of months that Elizabeth had been there, she and Jack had become friends. Jack wondered if that was because he was the only staff member who passes she didn't have to fend off. Jack guessed that he'd lose her friendship if he tried to ask her out, which was the one reason that kept him from asking her for a date. As Jack pushed open the main door of the dull building, a man who looked like one of Marcus' gym buddies grabbed Jack from inside. Frog marching him into the office, the gorilla then stripped Jack of all of his electronic gadgets, adding them to a pile already on the floor. Looking around, he could see that telephone wires, network cables, and optical fibers had been ripped out of their boxes. His co-workers were sitting around the big meeting table in the middle of the room, being guarded by a couple of sour-faced men with pistols. Jack walked over and sat at the back, wondering what the hell was going on. Marcus stormed in looking angry. He started to speak, a vein throbbing in his forehead as he did so. "For those of you who are too dumb to have it worked out for yourself, most of the tablets we've been selling for the past 10 years have been fake. That's why we've cornered the market. The last batch we imported was contaminated with something that people were dropping like flies. So it's time to clean up, and you're all going to help. Before you get any ideas, let me remind you that you're all involved too. My armed friends are here to make sure that you remember that." Only Elizabeth and a few of the faces around the table reacted to this. Maybe it hadn't come as news to most of them. Certainly few seemed as shocked as Jack felt. Marcus then instructed that the paperwork be shredded, tablets flushed away, empty packets burnt, and Jack wipe all the hard drives clean. Elizabeth had been ordered to help him and briefly held onto his arm as they started to go from PC to PC, booting each with a USB 3 key and running a secure erase utility. At least he now understood why Marcus had been so anti-cloud, insisting on storing all data locally on the server and across desktop hard drives. In the center of the room, one of the men with guns was keeping an eye on things, squinting through the open doorway whenever Jack went into the server room at the back. But the sun streaming through the server room's small window made it hard for the man to see inside. A blue box, labeled Plextor.wmv Pro, was sitting on the workbench, hidden from sight by a coffee machine that Jack had been trying to fix. Surreptitiously, Jack removed the drive from the box and slipped the SSD into a spare bay on the server. Then he started to copy all of the sales records. If he could get some data out and let the authorities know who the medicine had been sold to, then maybe a few lives would be saved. Both Jack and Elizabeth were in the server room when the first salesman was shot, but it was only Elizabeth who closed the metal door and started to pull down a rack to block it. The only exit, the small window, didn't open. And in the end, they were able to separate the old wooden window frame from the brick of the building. The quick SSD had finished pulling the data from the RAID array, so he shoved the slim drive into the pocket of his jeans before helping Elizabeth out and squeezing through the space. Climbing down the drainpipe was far harder in reality than in all the games he'd played. It seemed to take forever, but at last, their hands cut and bleeding, the two were almost on the ground. As they climbed down, a man stepped out of the shadows with a gun. "Don't run," he said. When they didn't, he holstered the gun and showed them the Secret Service ID embedded in his skin. Jack started to explain, and the man interrupted. "We know, we were listening. You have something for us?" It was a statement, not a question, and Jack handed him the SSD. "You two should leave, very quickly," the man said, getting onto a large electronic motorbike and noisily driving off. Elizabeth hailed an automatic cab and bundled Jack in, getting him to give the control panel his address. After they had been traveling in silence for about 10 minutes, he noticed the lights of 2 drones as they raced across the sky in the direction that Jack and Elizabeth had come from. Elizabeth did not react to the distant flash and sound of explosions that happened a second later. To his surprise, Elizabeth got out of the taxi with him when they drove up to his house. She stood next to him in the cold night as he searched his bag for his entry card. Finding it, Jack looked at Elizabeth, shivering next to him in the doorway, and asked her if she wanted to come in for a coffee. Visit facebook.com/PlextorGlobal to listen to the other stories in the series and to enter Futures Calling contests. Share your prediction for the future of technology for the chance to win your own ultra-fast Plextor SSD.